They thought he was just an old man behind the counter, limping quiet, forgettable. But Jack Miller wasn't just a gas station cashier. He was a ghost from a war they didn't know they'd entered. When 4 outlaws locked the doors and drew their weapons, they believed it would be an easy score. What they didn't know was that the man they trapped wasn't trapped at all. He'd already mapped every angle, every breath, and he wasn't alone. This wasn't a robbery, it was a test. And they picked the wrong veteran to test. Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel as we have a special story that'll be released soon. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with that soft, mechanical rhythm Jack had grown used to. They didn't flicker, not really, but they had a way of making the air feel thinner. The kind of artificial brightness that bleached out color made everything seem one shade flatter. The security monitor perched above the counter buzzed faintly. Cycling through 4 black and white camera angles, pump 1, pump 2, the back hallway near the mop sink, and the main entrance, Jack leaned back on the stool, lightly on the counter, the other holding a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. It was late, maybe just past 11. The quiet kind of late, when the highway settled into silence, and the only customers were long-haul truckers and people avoiding home. Outside, the wind moved loose bits of trash across the concrete, paper cups dancing in lazy circles near the Diesel Island. A semi had just pulled out 10 minutes ago, and now the lot was empty again. Jack didn't mind the stillness. In fact, he preferred it. He looked like a man time had folded in on. His gray hair stuck out beneath a faded ball cap, with a unit insignia long since unrecognizable. His beard was neatly kept, though it clung close to his jaw, as if afraid of drawing attention. His left knee stiffened sometimes when the temperature dropped, and he walked with the careful gait of someone who knew how to distribute pain evenly. Behind the register, everything was in order. Scratch tickets stacked, cigarettes alphabetized, even the candy bars aligned by expiration date. Jack kept it tight. That's how he liked it. Across from him, under the buzzing beer cooler light, the younger employee mopped slowly. Earbuds in, 17 maybe, a good kid. Jack hadn't known the boy long, but he could tell he listened. That counted for something. The kid's name was Marcus. Came in 3 nights a week after school, helped with stocking and closing. Asked more questions than he answered, but never pushed too hard. Jack had started showing him small things: how to reset the pumps manually, where the breaker was, how to tell the difference between someone needing help and someone looking for trouble. The old wall clock ticked over to 11:16. From behind the counter, Jack scanned the screen again. Nothing unusual, no cars, no movement. He shifted slightly. Reaching under the register to adjust the wiring on the backup camera system, most people thought the main cameras were it. They weren't. Jack had installed the second system 2 years ago, rigged quietly during a 3-day remodel when no one was paying attention. That system wasn't connected to the store's Wi-Fi. It was offline, running on its own loop, stored locally in the tiny hard drive buried behind the stockroom insulation. No one else knew it existed. He liked it that way. He took another sip of the cold coffee and barely reacted to the taste. His eyes moved again to the screen habit, not panic. One camera caught movement this time, a faint blur. He tapped the screen to switch angles. A van, no headlights. It pulled into the far side of the lot, just past the reach of the main light pole, the kind of placement that wasn't casual. Jack didn't move, he just watched. The van was old, rusted along the bottom edges, mismatched doors. No branding, no stickers, no plates. Inside the store, the air remained still. Marcus hadn't noticed. He was singing quietly to whatever was in his earbuds, pushing the mop toward the freezer section. Jack kept watching. One figure emerged from the passenger side, then another. A third stepped from the back. 3 men, maybe late 20s or early 30s. Jackets too heavy for the weather, heads down as they approached the doors. Jack didn't flinch. He reached under the counter, casually adjusted a knob on the ancient radio dial, and turned the volume up slightly. Nothing loud, just enough to make it clear he hadn't heard the door chime when they entered. He let the camera cycle one more time. All 4 feeds now showed some part of them. He took one last sip of his coffee, set the mug down quietly, and rested both hands flat on the counter. He didn't speak, not yet. Let them make the first move. He'd seen that play out enough times to know it was always better to wait, to let them underestimate you. Jack's face didn't change, but his eyes had sharpened, the kind of focus that didn't blink, the kind you only learned by surviving what other people didn't. The name tag said Jack, printed in fading black on a rectangle of cracked plastic. Most of the customers didn't look at it. If they did, they forgot it the moment they left. He was just the guy at the counter, the old man who rang up, snacks and cigarettes, who nodded quietly and handed over change without making conversation. He didn't seem gruff, just reserved. Tired, maybe? His eyes didn't wander and his voice didn't carry. His presence didn't linger in anyone's memory longer than the beep of the scanner. Locals thought he was someone who'd aged out of whatever life he'd planned. Maybe an extricator who got too slow for the road. Maybe a widower keeping busy with night shifts. He had the look of someone who didn't ask for much and didn't need anyone asking about him. He moved with a slight limp, nothing dramatic, just a stiffness in his left leg that showed up when he pivoted behind the counter. Nobody ever asked why. Jack Miller was 64. He worked 5 nights a week at the gas station just outside Hillview, near where Highway 14 curved past the old grain elevators. He didn't complain about hours, never called in sick, kept the register drawer balanced to the cent, stocked the shelves without being asked, and double-checked the locks. Every night, the manager, a man in his 30s with no military bearing and a clipboard full of procedures, didn't bother managing Jack. There was nothing to manage. Jack just did the job. But what nobody knew and what Jack had no intention of sharing was that he had once led men through jungles so dense you had to feel your way forward. That his limp wasn't from age or arthritis, but from a close-range IED in a market street south of Kandahar. That the quiet in him came from knowing what it sounded like when everything exploded at once and then fell still. For 22 years, Jack had served in a world most people only understood through headlines and war movies. He had enlisted young, passed the tests others failed, and never looked back. He had been to countries where you couldn't say your name out loud, had led reconnaissance missions in terrain so harsh that even helicopters stayed away. His unit had rotated through theaters of conflict the public didn't even know were active. By the time he retired, he had 2 reconstructed knees, a titanium plate in his left forearm, and scars that didn't show unless you were close enough to notice the way the skin shifted beneath his sleeves. He didn't wear medals, didn't tell stories, and didn't go to reunions. He didn't miss the chaos. But sometimes, when the nights got too quiet and the wind scraped against the station's windows, he could still hear the low static of the field radio in his ear, the muffled crunch of boots moving through dust. He didn't want to go back to that life. But he also hadn't left it completely. You never really do. Not when it taught you how to scan a room before you walk into it. Not when it taught you the sound of lies in someone's voice, or how to tell who's carrying a weapon by the way their coat moves when they shift their weight. Jack never advertised who he had been, but he didn't try to forget either. The shelves behind the counter hid more than just cigarettes. He'd made certain modifications to the back room: reinforced door frame, secondary phone line, emergency med kit. A few things the average cashier wouldn't think to keep on hand. He wasn't paranoid. He was prepared. When the wind blew wrong, when headlights lingered too long in the lot, when a group came in too confident and too loud, Jack felt the shift in the air before anyone else did. Not with fear, with clarity. The man behind the counter might have looked like someone waiting out his days, worn down by time. But the truth was simpler. He had spent 2 decades living on instinct. Now, instinct was all he trusted. And on nights, like this one, nights when something didn't feel quite right, that instinct was already leaning forward, watching, listening, quiet as ever, but no longer still. The bell above the door had a distinct rhythm. Not loud, but enough to mark a presence, just one short ring when someone entered, a sharper one when they left. Jack had come to recognize who it was without even turning his head. The sound of footsteps told the rest. Heavy boots meant Marvin from the scrapyard, always tracking in dust. Lighter, hurried steps, those were the night nurses, changing shifts at the clinic. He could tell if someone was drunk by the uneven shuffle. He could tell if someone was nervous by how long they lingered near the energy drinks. Pretending to browse, every shift started the same. He'd arrive 15 minutes early, not because anyone expected him to, but because it gave him time to walk the perimeter. He checked the pump locks, watched the shadow lines along the rear fence. He moved slowly, not because he was old, but because slow made people overlook you. Inside, the air smelled faintly of burned coffee and bleach, the kind of clean that's only surface deep. He flicked on the backroom lights, counted the drawer, replaced the receipt tape before it ran out. Every detail mattered. At 8:47 each night, the first regular pulled in, a mail truck that ran late pickups along the county routes. The driver barely spoke. Jack handed over a black coffee and a pack of gum before the man asked, "No thank yous, just routine." Then came Mrs. Dorsey at 9:10, always looking tired, always buying the same menthols and a scratch ticket she never won. She'd nod once and leave without looking up. Jack kept an eye on her brake lights through the window, just to make sure they came on. She was getting slower behind the wheel. By 10 o'clock, the station grew quieter. Jack restocked the coolers, rotating. Labels forward, checking seals on the milk jugs. It wasn't busy work, it was coverage. Each trip into the aisle gave him a new vantage. The convex mirrors overhead weren't reliable bad angles, blind corners. He preferred knowing how the shelves created lanes of sight and cover. Every row a path, every freezer door a reflection. A security camera showed what already happened. Jack wanted to know what was about too. When he poured coffee, he always faced outward, never turned his back to the door, not even for a second. He had rearranged the coffee bar months ago, moved the lids and stirrers to the sidewall. The manager thought it was a preference thing. It wasn't. It just gave him 10 more degrees of visual coverage. One night, a teenager had tried to slip a pint of vodka into his hoodie while pretending to browse sports drinks. Jack had spotted the elbow angle from the corner of his eye before the kid even reached the shelf. He didn't say anything then, just stepped behind him, hand already on the phone. The kid left it and walked out fast. Jack never needed to raise his voice. Most people didn't realize how much they gave away. A scratch of the neck, a glance at the exit, the way someone's shoulders tightened before they lied. Jack caught all of it. He didn't even try. It had become automatic. The radio behind the counter stayed low. Country some nights, oldies on others. Familiar voices filled the silence but didn't distract. He'd learned long ago how to separate sound from signal. A cough 3 aisles over meant someone stalling. A dropped bottle could be nerves. A hand that touched the counter twice before pulling a card likely stealing time to think. Jack filed it all away. The repetition didn't dull him. It sharpened him. He knew how long it took for a sedan to circle the lot. He knew when a license plate didn't belong. There was a green Dodge that had come through 3 times in 1 week without stopping. The 3rd time, Jack noted the out-of-state tags and sent a quiet heads-up to the local deputy he still kept in touch with. Nothing came of it, but that wasn't the point. Every shelf stocked, every step counted, every glance received. Because routine wasn't just comfort, it was control. And Jack knew that when control slipped, even for a second, that's when the danger walked in. It was 11:57 when the headlights swept across the front windows. Jack didn't react right away. The glass caught just enough of the outside glare for him to see that the vehicle wasn't clean. The kind contractors usually had, though this one had no company logo, no ladder rack, no tools. Tied down by the time the van came to a full stop, Jack had stepped quietly back behind the counter. He didn't move fast. Fast draws attention. He picked up the paper cup with the last of his cold coffee and pretended to take a sip. Through the front window, he saw it clearly, now mid-90s model Ford. 2-tone paint peeling at the seams, one door slightly dented near the hinge. No front plate, no rear plate either. That was enough to raise the first flag. The van idled for a moment. No one got out. Jack glanced once at the monitor. The image on the pump camera showed the vehicle parked just outside the painted lines. Close to the door, but not close enough to be casual. He tapped a button to zoom in slightly. Still no movement. Then the engine cut. 3 doors opened at once. The driver stepped out first, tall, maybe late 20s, with a trucker hat pulled low in shoulders that rolled as he walked as if unused to being observed without purpose. He kept his hands in his jacket pockets. The passenger followed shorter, wider, head shaved close. To the skin, his boots hit the ground hard, steel-toed, heavy. The 3rd man exited from the sliding side door. This one moved differently. Not hurried, not lazy, methodical. His eyes scanned the station windows before he followed the others in. Jack didn't move. He didn't blink. But something inside him had already clicked into a different gear. He had felt this before long ago in foreign streets, before ambushes and roadside traps. The wrong kind of calm, the wrong kind of silence. From the back, Marcus was still mopping, oblivious. The kind of thing you notice when people haven't rehearsed, being casual. The one in the trucker hat reached the door first. Wasn't the door opened? The bell rang. The three walked in, all at once, trying too hard not to look coordinated. Jack greeted them with a nod. Not warm, not cold, just the way he greeted everyone. The tall one walked to the far aisle where the motor oil and wiper fluid were. The heavyset one wandered over toward the register, eyes trailing along the candy racks. The third one stood by the coffee machine, glancing now and then toward the back hallway where Marcus was. None of them touched anything. Jack took in each detail: the dirt under their fingernails, the weight distribution in their stance, the way their eyes never rested too long on any one spot. He had seen this before. It wasn't theft. It was formation. A loose triangle, testing field of vision, timing reactions, seeing how quickly a response came. What they didn't know was that Jack had already seen the tire wear pattern on the van, the irregular bulge near the rear axle, the crack in the passenger taillight. He'd memorized it before they even crossed the lot. The man closest to the counter finally spoke. "Just grabbing a soda," he said, reaching toward the cooler. But not opening it, Jack gave a slight nod, watching the reflection in the chrome refrigerator handle. The man never made it to the soda. Instead, he turned and gave a small, almost imperceptible signal, a tilt of the head toward the others. Jack had seen enough. He shifted his weight subtly. One hand moved beneath the counter, resting beside. The silent alarm, the station thought, was for police dispatch. But Jack hadn't wired it that way. The wrong night and the wrong man behind the counter. The bell above the door gave its usual half-hearted ring, a small sound that faded almost as quickly as it came. But for Jack, it was enough. By the time the three men stepped fully into the fluorescent light of the gas station, he'd already logged what he needed: the first one tall, wiry, about 6 foot, to had the gait of someone used to movement, but something was off. Jack clocked it instantly. The man favored his left leg slightly, likely from an old break that didn't heal. Clean. His jacket was military issue. His eyes moved constantly, too fast, scanning the ceiling corners and shelf lines, not looking for snacks, looking for placement, positioning. The second man, the heavyset one, wore boots scuffed down to the steel, not work boots, but standard issue combat, the kind you don't get unless you've either served or known someone who did. His neck bore the faded edge of a tattoo that disappeared beneath his collar. Old ink, prison work, by the look of the line work, the kind done with guitar strings and cigarette ash. He moved slower, but his eyes were sharp. They stayed mostly on Jack. The third one lingered closest to the coffee machine, his fingers twitching as he reached for a stir stick he didn't need. Small hand tremor, not from age. Jack had seen that kind of shake before in soldiers days out from withdrawal. The man's nails were trimmed unevenly, likely bitten down, and his breathing was too shallow for someone who hadn't moved much. His hoodie hung loose, too warm for the weather. But Jack could see the imprint of something flat under the right side, probably tucked waistband, no holster. That was sloppy, desperate. None of them spoke at first. That was what confirmed it. For Jack, the silence wasn't hesitation, it was coordination. Unspoken planning. Each one of them split, keeping enough distance to avoid drawing suspicion, but too evenly spaced not to notice if you knew how to read a room. Jack had read 1,000 storefronts, alleyways, field camps, shanty checkpoints on borders that didn't officially exist. It was always the same. The men who came in and didn't want trouble. They bought what they needed and moved on. These three were waiting for something, a signal, an opportunity. Behind the counter, Jack kept his posture neutral. He leaned just slightly on his left forearm, making it seem casual. That put his hand within 6 inches of the undercounter panel he'd installed himself, not the alarm trigger, the one wired through the old cigarette rack that no one bothered checking anymore. He didn't reach for it, not yet, but he let his fingers rest there. The tall one finally reached for something, a pack of jerky off the side hook near the counter. His hand was steady, but Jack saw the tightness in his wrist, the way he used it to check distance. From the edge, Of the display to Jack, to the register, measuring, judging reaction time, calculating. "You guys passing through?" Jack asked, voice even flat. Not friendly, not suspicious, just there, like clock hands, something like that. The big one said, his voice carried just a hint of gravel. Jailhouse rhythm. Not born of age, born of tension. The third man, the shaky one, didn't say anything. He scratched the side of his face with a knuckle, eyes fixed on the floor tiles. Jack noticed the smudge of ink beneath the sleeve. Hard to tell without seeing the whole thing, but it was enough to place him as connected. Jack took a slow breath, not out of nervousness, but to steady his timing. His knee had started to throb from standing too still, but he didn't shift his weight yet. Movement invited awareness. He needed these men to think he hadn't noticed, that he was just the same tired cashier they'd expected to find, alone. He'd timed how long it would take to vault the counter knot, ideal with his leg, but doable. He'd memorized the distance from each man to the nearest threat. He knew where the kid Marcus was standing in the back hall mop bucket still out, earbuds in. Jack made a mental note. If things started, he'd have about 4 seconds to keep the boy out of it. The man at the coffee station finally looked. Up, his pupils were dilated. Too much. Jack recognized the micro delay in his reactions. He was high, not just twitchy, chemically unstable. Jack didn't move, didn't blink, he just waited. He knew what they were. Not a team, not professionals, not soldiers. They were men who had done time, seen blood, maybe hurt people, but they weren't trained for what they were walking into, and they weren't ready for him. The tall one, the one with the jerky still in hand, turned toward the counter and gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jack had seen plenty of those over the years, lips parting, teeth showing, but nothing shifting behind the eyes. It was the kind of smile people used when they were trying to decide whether to charm you or lie to you. Jack didn't return it. The man set the jerky down and grabbed a pack of gum from the wire rack next to the register. "You guys got cameras in here?" he asked casually, tearing at the plastic on the gum like it was a nervous habit. Jack nodded. "Once all 4 corners," he replied, voice steady. "Backup system too, doesn't stream. Records to a drive in the back." The man paused just slightly, a flicker of discomfort crossing his brow. "Smart," he muttered. "Some places cheap out. You can't trust tech these days." The bigger one by the cigarette display picked up a carton of menthols, turned it in his hands without reading the label, and set it back down. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't seem to want to buy anything. He just stood there, hands tucked into his hoodie pocket, rocking slightly on the balls of his feet, like someone deciding how long was too long to stay unnoticed. The third man lingered near the entrance, close to the chip rack. He hadn't moved far from the door since stepping inside. Every few seconds he glanced out the window, scanning the parking lot, then back toward his 2 companions. Jack watched the rhythm. Left, right, in. Left, right, in. He wasn't watching for people coming in, he was watching for the go-ahead, or maybe the signal to stall. Jack had seen the look before in convoy stops gone bad, the look of a lookout, the guy not meant to fight, just to time the breach. Jack scanned their hands again. The big one had a subtle bulge on his right hip. Could have been a wallet, but the shape was wrong. It was longer, angled slightly forward. Jack knew the type, cheap holster, probably plastic, the kind sold in discount bins or pawn shops, not the kind of thing a professional would carry. The tall one, gum now shoved into his cheek, kept his hand close to his side, brushing the hem of his jacket like he was nervous it might move without warning. Jack adjusted the receipt paper in the printer and let the silence stretch. Most customers filled quiet with small talk. These guys let it sit too long. It wasn't natural, it was deliberate, manufactured, quiet. The big one broke it. "You work here long?" he asked, eyes still roaming the cigarette shelves. Jack looked. "Up, a few years. Must get boring sometimes." The man nodded like he understood, but Jack knew he didn't. People like that didn't know what boring felt like. They only knew stillness as a delay. They were waiting for something. The tall one reached into his pocket for a crumpled 5 Jack. Noticed the way he kept one finger curled inward, trigger discipline, even without a weapon visible. It was subtle, but there, the kind of thing learned, not accidental. He handed Jack the bill. "Just the gum," he said. "Figured I should buy something." Jack rang it up without looking at the total. The drawer opened. Jack didn't glance down. He didn't need to. His hand moved with practiced ease, giving the right change without taking his eyes off the man's face. The man took it and smiled. Again, still empty. "You all closing soon?" he asked. Jack shook his head. "Open all night." Another pause, the kind meant to fill space, not time. Then the tall one turned to the others. "We good?" The big man gave a slow nod. The one by the door didn't say a word. They hadn't done anything. Not yet, but Jack's body knew what his mind was still waiting to name. Something was coming. Something stupid. Maybe tonight. Maybe in 5 minutes. He watched the 3 men slowly drift back toward one another, loosely orbiting the small convenience. Store like it was unfamiliar terrain. Jack didn't reach for anything. He just waited, eyes sharp, posture still, and every part of him ready. The name came out casually, almost like an afterthought. "Rafe, you want anything?" His posture didn't change. But inside, something clicked. Hard into place, he let the sound echo once through his memory to make sure he hadn't misheard. Rafe. He had read that name just that morning, printed on a black and white bulletin quietly slid across his desk during shift change. Regional Bolo. No photo attached, just a composite sketch. Mid-30s, Caucasian male, 6'2", multiple felony warrants. Believed armed and mobile, last seen traveling with 2 associates, known to be dangerous, suspected in 2 armed robberies. Across county lines, both at small, late-night businesses, gas stations, no fatalities yet. Jack had paused on the bulletin longer than usual. No last known city, just vague direction moving west. Now, here they were, and one of them just used the name aloud. Jack acted like he didn't hear it. He reached for a stack of scratch tickets someone had left near the edge of the counter and began straightening them. The voice was low, raspy, the kind of where that came from, cigarettes, or years of shouting over machinery, or holding your breath through adrenaline. Jack watched his posture. Loose, but with intent underneath. The kind of body that had run before, the kind that could still sprint if it had to. The big man didn't notice the slip. He was too focused. On playing casual, which was always the giveaway, he wandered toward the back aisle near the freezers, reaching for nothing, just buying time. The third man followed him, tossing out meaningless comments about snack prices as if to fill space with sound, but Jack's focus had narrowed now. The name was enough. He replayed the bulletin line by line in his mind, extracting the language the sheriff's department used: may attempt armed robbery under cover of distraction. Hostage. A late-night cashier forced to sit quietly behind the counter while the safe was emptied. The man had lived, but Jack remembered the line in the report: shaken, deep bruising, hospitalized for observation. It wasn't about watching anymore. He slid one hand beneath the counter against, naturally resting it near the hidden trigger point beneath the drawer. He hadn't designed it for law enforcement. The store had a panic button wired to the local dispatch, sure, but Jack had reworked his system to do something different. If things got worse, that trigger would drop the steel shutters he'd installed himself, shutting every entry point except the emergency back exit. He'd never told the manager, never filed the paperwork, but he'd tested it 3 times in the middle of the night. It worked. He looked back at Rafe, who was now facing a shelf of sunglasses, pretending to read the tags. That was the first mistake. The name wasn't meant to slip. They'd been on the move too long, getting careless. Confident in the silence between towns, no one had caught them yet. No one had resisted. And that had made them bold. Or the rhythm of their scam. But Jack had spent a lifetime reading more from silence than from words. He straightened one final stack of gum, packets, and turned slightly toward the register screen. He wasn't smiling, and he wasn't waiting anymore. On the monitor above the register, the 4-way camera feed stuttered. It happened fast, just a flicker, and then the display froze. 3 seconds, maybe less. The image pixelated, paused mid-frame, then resumed. Jack didn't move, but he knew. The system didn't glitch. Not like that. It was wired directly into a surge-protected junction behind the cooler, insulated from the rest of the store's erratic grid. He'd tested it under blackout. Tested it when windstorms snapped. Lines for half the county. That system didn't blink. Unless someone made it blink when the feed came back. Jack let his eyes track across each square. Pump 1 clear, pump 2 no change, back hallway empty. Front door just the faint outline of Rafe, shifting weight from 1 foot to the other near the chip display. But in that 3-second window, anything could have changed. A weapon moved, a position shifted. Jack knew what to look for. His hand reached calmly under the register knot to press. Not yet, but just to rest near the small toggle that controlled the auxiliary loop. The backup system, the one they hadn't just seen glitch. Because it never did. Then it came. The smile, the tall one with the gum, leaned just slightly forward on the counter, his mouth curving too wide, too easy. His teeth flashed briefly beneath lips stretched too tight. Not a friendly gesture, a signal. Jack didn't return it. The man looked around casually, elbow resting on the counter like he'd settled in. "Quiet night, huh?" he said, voice lazy. "A little too relaxed. Bet you get tired of this routine." Jack shrugged, eyes still on the monitor. "Some nights are slower than others." The man nodded like he understood, but Jack could see it, now see the timing, the spacing, the exact placement of each man. The heavyset one had moved from the freezer aisle to the rear hallway entrance, near the backroom door. He hadn't said a word in 10 minutes, just drifted there half-leaning on the snack shelf, hand stuffed, deep in his hoodie, watching. Rafe was still by the door, but now he faced in, fully turned, not browsing, not pretending, just standing, waiting. The kind of posture Jack had seen in the outer rings of a raid, where someone's only job was to cover the exit. 3 positions. One smile, one glitch in the system. The pieces slid together cleanly in Jack's mind. They weren't improvising anymore. This wasn't a distraction or a warm-up, it was the start. And that smiled too wide to self-assured was a mistake. The kind made by someone who'd done this before but never had it go wrong. A grin that counted on fear. On delay, on disbelief. Jack had seen it in a dozen countries, on faces that didn't last long. Overconfidence always cracked first. It hid nerves beneath jokes and charm. And when that failed, it always turned to force. "Marcus," Jack called out, keeping his voice level. The kid's head poked around from the back hallway, earbuds dangling. "Yeah, go check the lock on the back gate," Jack said. "Take your time." Marcus nodded and disappeared. The smile at the counter faded just slightly. "Problem with your security system?" the tall man asked, tone still light, almost mocking. Jack glanced up at the monitor. "Must be the weather," he said quietly. Even though the air outside was clear and still, he watched the tall man's pupils narrow slightly at the answer. That was enough. He'd been expecting a different reaction. Surprise, worry, panic. Maybe, but Jack's face didn't shift. Because what none of them knew, not Rafe by the door, not the quiet one near the hallway, not the grinning fool at the counter, was that Jack had seen this scene before. In bank corridors in Iraq, in fractured towns near the borderlands of Serbia, in dark rooms where the only sound was breathing and the clicking of a safety being flicked off, 3 seconds of camera. Failure told him what kind of night this was going to be, and that grin told him exactly who they thought they were dealing with. The sound of the bolts sliding into place wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like the snap of a bone. A hard metal thunk, followed by silence. Jack heard it before he saw who had done it. The door had been locked from the inside, not the kind of mistake someone makes reaching for the wrong handle. This was deliberate. Rafe stood beside the frame, one hand on the horizontal bar, the other dipping beneath his hoodie. When he turned back toward the store, the gun was already in his grippa, compact, semi-automatic, black, unregistered if Jack had to guess. He didn't raise it, not yet, just held it low, loose in one hand, like someone who thought fear would do most of the work. "No one else comes in or out," Rafe said. The tone wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to catch Marcus mid-step near the stockroom. Jack saw the boy freeze, one foot still hovering above the floor. Rafe's eyes flicked toward the movement and back. He didn't point the weapon, but the message was clear. The tall one at the counter shifted his stance, less casual now. He reached back under his jacket, hand settling just above his waistband, where a second weapon likely waited. He didn't draw it yet. They were pacing this. They thought they had time. Jack still hadn't moved. He didn't raise his hands, didn't blink, just stood there behind the counter, as if the scene in front of him was a minor inconvenience, like a power outage or a spilled drink. His left hand hovered inches from the shelf lip beneath the drawer. The hidden trigger waited. One flick, and the doors would lock down. Steel shutters over every entrance, but not yet. Not until they committed, Rafe scanned the store, slow and controlled. His hand tightened slightly on the grip. The twitchy one near the hallway started muttering to himself, half under his breath. Jack couldn't catch the words, but the rhythm was jittery, unpredictable. He was the wild card, unstable, probably on something. Jack marked his location automatically 12 feet from Marcus, maybe 3 paces from the back hall. If he moved toward the boy, things would have to start early. Rafe's attention returned to Jack's drawer. "Now," he said, nodding toward the register. Jack looked at him for the first time. Really looked not through the lens of behavior, but eye to eye. Rafe held his gaze, but something in him flinched under the stare. Just barely. Enough for Jack to see what he needed. Not a hardened killer, not a planner, just a man playing a role he wasn't quite ready for. Jack didn't reach for the drawer. He didn't move at all. He spoke instead, quiet, calm, no edge. "You sure about this?" The question landed heavier than expected. The man at the counter turned slightly. The third one muttered louder now, pacing near the back. Rafe took a half step forward, the barrel of the gun angling slightly upward. "Don't be a hero, old man." Jack blinked once, slow. "You already made your first mistake. You just haven't felt it yet." That changed the air. The pacing stopped. The man at the counter straightened. Rafe's grip tightened. Jack waited 1 second more, then another. Then his finger tapped the trigger under the shelf. No click, no sound. But somewhere inside the station, the current flowed into a relay, and, with a sudden sharp clang, the steel security shutters dropped down from hidden tracks over the entrance and side windows. 300 pounds of reinforced metal locked into place over the front door, cutting off the last glimpse of the night outside. The gun in Rafe's hand twitched upward. What the Jack didn't let him finish. He moved then, not fast, but efficiently, left foot planted, right shoulder angled forward. No panic, no wasted motion. The counter wasn't a barrier. It was home turf, and now it was sealed. 3 men, 2 weapons. 1 mistake, and Jack was done waiting. The 3 men in the gas station didn't look worried. Not yet. The shutters had rattled down hard, sure, and that had unsettled them for a beat, but they still believed they were in control. Rafe's gun was out, and the tall one at the counter had now drawn his low and angled toward the floor like he'd practiced looking tough in front of mirrors. The twitchy one near the hallway shifted from foot to foot, glancing around, mouthing something under his breath. They saw Jack, one old man behind a counter, and the kid, just a kid. Marcus hadn't moved since the moment the gun came out. He stood half-shadowed near the edge of the hallway, mop handle frozen in his hands. He looked pale, eyes wide. 1 foot behind the other, like he couldn't decide whether to step forward or run. Rafe gave him a quick glance, but dismissed him just as fast. They thought it was just Jack and some after-school hire with too much hair and too little sense. What they didn't know, what none of them had any way of knowing, was that Marcus had been trained not in a formal way, not by a program, but by Jack himself. For the last 2 years, quietly, consistently, the boy had been learning everything Jack remembered. How to breathe slowly in tight moments. How to read movement before it happened. How to disarm a man with 1 step and a snap of leverage. How to stay calm when others expected fear. He wasn't just some teenager wiping tile. He was Jack's godson, the son of a woman Jack had served beside long ago, a woman who'd never come back from her 3rd deployment. And before she died, she'd left a letter with Jack in it. She asked only one thing: if anything happens to me, teach him to be steady, not strong, steady. So Jack had piece by piece, a little every week, not all at once, not with drills or commands, but through repetition. Quiet learning, observation first, reaction later. Now, in the middle of this gas station turn standoff, that quiet preparation was about to matter. Rafe still had the gun pointed generally toward Jack, but his grip was sloppy. His finger edged too close to the trigger guard. His shoulders had gone tense, not from confidence, but from uncertainty. He didn't know what came next, and that was eating at him. "You locked us in here, old man," Rafe said, voice cracking just slightly. "You think that's going to stop anything?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. The tall man near the register stepped around to the side of the counter, gun raised, eyes scanning. "Where's the safe?" "There's no safe, Jack," replied. That earned a laugh. A sharp, humorless bark. "Don't play dumb." Jack just looked at him, calm, unmoved. The man raised his voice, stepping closer. I said, "Where's the goddamn A sound cut through his words?" The unmistakable click of a safety. Being disengaged, the noise came from behind him. Marcus, he was still holding the mop, but now it was dropped to the floor beside his foot. In his hands, gripped with surprising steadiness, was a compact shotgun, one Jack had kept hidden in a false panel behind the supply cart, only to be accessed if the locks fell and the math shifted against them. The gun didn't shake in Marcus's hands. His stance was firm, feet shoulder width, elbows tucked. The tall man turned in time to see the muzzle aimed dead center at his torso. Jack's voice came soft but clear. "You boys should have paid more attention." Rafe swung his aim toward Marcus, panicked. Jack moved then fast for any man, but impossibly smooth for someone his age. His arm came up with a metal baton extended in one flick, a crack of air as it extended. It connected hard with Rafe's wrist before the man could fire, the gun clattering to the floor. The moment cracked, the illusion shattered. 3 men had come into that gas station believing they were in charge, that they were facing an old man and a kid with soft hands, but they hadn't walked into a gas station. They'd walked into a lesson, one they wouldn't forget. Jack raised his hand slowly, with a kind of composure that made it feel less like surrender and more like acknowledgement. His palms faced forward, fingers spread slightly. No rush, no sharp movements. He kept his breathing even, his shoulders relaxed. Rafe stood just a few feet away now, gun in hand, lip curled in a tight sneer that didn't quite mask the hesitation in his eyes. The adrenaline had hit him too early. Jack could see it. His stance wasn't balanced anymore. His grip was tightening too much, too fast, like he was trying to convince himself he was in control. Jack's voice came low, measured. "All right, easy." The shotgun in Marcus's hands was still up, but the boy had stiffened. His arms were locked straight, to tense. His feet weren't set now. The sound of the earlier commotion had shifted him, knocked him slightly off the rhythm Jack had drilled into him. The back hallway lights flickered faintly behind him, casting shadows across the mop bucket and supply shelves. Marcus stood at the edge of it, half in, half out, like he wasn't sure which way he was supposed to run. Jack didn't take his eyes off the men in front of him, but he spoke gently, aimed over their heads. "Marcus," the boy didn't answer. Jack could hear his breath from where he stood, shallow, fast. "You're okay, just breathe, son." "Lower the barrel." Rafe's eyes flicked toward the sound. "Who the hell is Marcus?" Jack's tone didn't shift. "That's not your concern." The tall man by the register had stepped back, toward the center of the store, gun now raised but not pointed at anything in particular. He looked more uncertain than the others, less convinced they had the upper hand. The third man, the twitchy one, was now hovering close to the coolers, his eyes darting between the steel shutters and the growing tension. Jack watched him carefully. If anything went wrong, it would start with him. The tremor in his right hand had returned, and he was mumbling again, almost like he was trying to calm himself down or stir himself up. Either way, he was a problem. Jack took a half step forward, slow, deliberate, his hand still raised. "You got what you wanted," he said to Rafe. "No one's fighting, the drawer's yours." Rafe motioned with the gun. "Open it, Jack." Nodded. "All right. Just keep your friend back." He tilted his head slightly, toward the man near the hallway. Rafe didn't answer. His grip was tight again. Jack opened the drawer slowly. Bills fanned out in the tray, 20s and 10s neatly sorted. There wasn't much. Jack knew that the daily drops happened like clockwork. But to these men, maybe it was enough. Jack let his hand hover above the drawer, not touching anything. "Still in full view, you can take it." The tall one stepped forward, eager. Rafe didn't stop him. He holstered his weapon, trying to look casual, but Jack caught the way his hand hovered near the grip. He wasn't relaxed. He was hoping it was over, that they could grab the cash and go. Jack let them think that dot behind the counter, the backup. The system was still running, silent, disconnected from the main grid. Every second was being recorded, every movement tagged and timestamped. Jack had designed it to kick in during breaches exactly like this. Marcus hadn't moved yet. The shotgun was now angled slightly down, but his eyes were still locked on. Rafe, fear, and calculation battling inside him. Jack spoke again, calm and certain. "Marcus, put it down." This time, the boy obeyed. Slowly, he lowered the weapon until the barrel touched the linoleum floor, then backed away into the shadows of the hallway. Jack didn't look, but he listened for the sound of retreating steps. Rafe stepped around. The counter now, his back to the hallway. Jack let him come, let him look. He was complying for now, because sometimes the only way to control a room was to let it think you weren't, and that's exactly what Jack intended. Rafe stepped closer, gun still out, but wavering slightly as if the weight of it was starting to mean more in his hand. His voice came sharp this time, edged with impatience. "That can't be it. Where's the safe?" Jack didn't flinch. He stayed exactly where he was, hands slightly lowered now, one resting near the drawer. The bills sat exposed in the open till, maybe 200 in small bills. Not enough for what these men thought they came for. "There is no safe," Jack said evenly. "We don't keep that kind of money here, just the drawer." The tall one leaned forward, peering over the counter. He grabbed a handful of bills and stuffed them in his coat, then glanced back at Rafe. "He's messing with us. Every place like this has a safe." The twitchy one, near the coolers, let out a breathy laugh, nervous and high-pitched. "He's got one, probably behind that stockroom. Let me check." Rafe raised a hand to stop him. "Wait." Jack kept his tone steady. "There is no safe. Corporate policy drops every night. That's all there is." But Rafe wasn't listening. Not really. His eyes moved past Jack now, scanning the shelves behind the register, the locked cabinet with the cigarettes, the side wall with the dusty calendar, an old shift schedule. He wanted to believe Jack was lying. Needed to. A job like this wasn't supposed to be for $200 and a camera system. The tall man reached across and slammed the drawer shut. "You think we're stupid? You think we're gonna walk out of here with pocket change?" Jack didn't answer. Rafe raised the gun slightly. "Tell us where it is." Jack looked at him squarely. "There is no safe." His words hung in the air for a beat too long, the kind of silence that shifts the energy in a room. The twitchy one stepped forward now, breathing heavier. "Then we tear the place apart. If he won't say, we find it. We check the walls, the back, the floorboards." Jack's eyes moved subtly, not enough to draw attention, but enough to track Marcus, who had silently moved further into the shadows of the hallway, crouched just out of sight. The boy was no longer holding the shotgun, but he hadn't left. Jack had told him once, never disappear completely. Always know where the exits are and where the threats are standing. The tension in the store began to change shape. It wasn't just about the money now, it was about power, control. The men had come in expecting quick fear and quicker compliance. They were losing that grip with every minute. Jack remained still. Rafe pressed the muzzle of the gun lightly against the counter. "You're going to open something, a vault, a lockbox, something. We're not leaving here with just chump change." Jack leaned forward just slightly, not aggressive, but deliberate. "You think this is a bank? You think they'd leave stacks of cash in a place like this?" The tall man scoffed. "You're lying. Old guys like you always think they're smarter than everyone else." Jack's voice didn't rise. "Old guys like me have seen how this plays out. You'll tear the place apart, find nothing, and then what? You start getting nervous. One of you panics. Someone gets hurt. That's your plan." The twitchy one let out another nervous laugh, louder this time. He's bluffing. But Jack wasn't bluffing. The men didn't know that every second they delayed, the silent system in the back was already pinging its remote note of failsafe. Jack had added himself after the local sheriff's office took over 6 minutes to respond to a stabbing at a liquor store down the road last year. A silent call had already gone out. He didn't know if help would come soon, but he didn't need it yet, not as long as he could stretch their uncertainty. Stepped back slightly. "If there's no safe," he said slowly, "then maybe we take something else." Jack didn't move. The man looked toward the hallway, toward where Marcus had vanished. And now the air truly shifted, from money to leverage, from greed to threat. Jack saw it in Rafe's eyes before he even said the next words, and that was the moment things stopped being about the drawer. Jack's right hand moved beneath the counter, slow and precise. While his left remained resting on the formica edge, fingers splayed like he was trying to stay calm. His body didn't shift much, no sudden movements, nothing to draw eyes. He could feel the gun's presence across from him, the weight of it pointed loosely in his direction. The way Rafe kept adjusting his stance like he hadn't yet decided whether to escalate or back off. The switch was tucked inside the upper lip of the drawer casing, camouflaged by a strip of worn black plastic. It wasn't labeled. It didn't beep. It didn't send out a signal with flashing lights or alarms. Jack's finger found it with ease. The pad of his index finger hovered over it, felt for the dip, then pushed in. A soft click, barely audible. No change in the room. Nothing for the men to see. But something had changed. It wasn't a standard panic button. The police line had one of those, sure, near the cigarette cabinet, but Jack hadn't touched it. The local sheriff's office was still a good 15 minutes away on a good night, and tonight wasn't a good night. And if the deputies came in sirens blazing, someone might not walk out. Jack couldn't afford that. No, this switch triggered something different. Behind the employee break room, beyond a plywood panel that looked like a utility cover, a small battery system buzzed to life. It wasn't connected to the main power grid. Jack had wired it himself 2 winters ago, after a string of robberies along the county line. He didn't trust store policy. He trusted his own wiring. The switch didn't alert law enforcement. It activated a lockdown protocol Jack had installed piece by piece. Most hand-detecting floor sensors, electromagnetic locks on the interior supply doors, and one more surprise that wasn't visible to anyone inside. Along the narrow hallway leading to the back, a false vent cover slid open with a near-silent click. Behind it, nestled in a low cavity near the baseboard, was a worn duffel bag. Inside, not cash, not weapons, just what Jack had always considered his final line of preparation: a burner phone connected to a secure line, a pair of earphones, and 2 sets of pre-programmed audio triggers. One was already playing now from a speaker hidden in the overhead air duct near the rear of the store. A low, constant hum began, the kind of mechanical buzz that sounded like a refrigeration unit spooling up but just off enough to feel wrong. Below the audible layer, an ultra-low frequency tone vibrated in rhythmic pulses. Most people couldn't name it, but they could feel it, like the floor had started to thrum beneath their feet, like something structural had shifted without warning. He looked down, then up, his lips slightly parted like he was trying to place a noise he couldn't quite hear. "You feel that?" he asked no one in particular. The tall one near the counter furrowed his brow. "What that? That sound. Like something's vibrating." Rafe ignored him. His focus stayed on Jack, who hadn't moved. "What did you just do?" Jack said nothing. His eyes didn't blink. His hand was already away from the button. As far as the Outlaws knew, nothing had happened. And maybe that was the point. "Answer me. You're the one holding the gun." Jack replied quietly. "Why are you the one who sounds nervous?" Behind Rafe, the hum deepened just slightly. The pitch didn't change, but the feeling of it thickened the air. It wasn't psychological. It was engineered. Jack had once helped develop sound-based disruption tools for crowd control, ways to disorient without force, to divide a group's unity without touching them. He'd repurposed the technology on a smaller scale, not to harm, just to shake confidence, to erode certainty. The twitchy one backed toward the coolers. "Something's wrong with this place, man." The tall one was turning in circles now, scanning the ceiling. "Is that a generator? What is that?" Jack's voice cut through them both. "I told you, there's no safe." And for the first time since they'd walked in, none of the men answered, because they weren't sure anymore who was cornering who. The switch had been pressed. The countdown had started. Now Jack just had to wait. And he was very, very good at waiting. The tall one moved first. His hand shot across the counter and grabbed Jack by the collar, bunching the fabric of his button-down shirt and pulling him forward against the metal edge. Jack didn't resist. He let the movement happen, let the pressure pull at his neck and tighten the seam against his throat. His feet stayed planted. He didn't flinch. That was part of it, making them believe their show of force was working. "You think you're smart?" the man hissed. His breath smelled like burnt coffee and nerves. "You think this is a game?" Jack didn't speak. He simply looked at the man, not glaring, not scared, just watching. Hallway now, stepping past the stockroom entrance with one hand brushing the wall like he needed the contact to stay upright. He was mumbling again, half to himself. "I'll find it. Gotta be a panel or something. Back offices always hide the good stuff." Jack's eyes shifted for the first time, tracking him. "You don't want to go back there," Jack said. Calmly, the tall man jerked Jack's shirt tighter, fist twisting at the collarbone. "You're not in a position to warn anybody." Jack didn't look at him. His gaze stayed fixed on the hallway. "Don't go back there," he said again, quieter this time. The kind of quiet that carried weight. Usually question, but the twitchy one didn't stop. His boots squeaked on the tile, and then they didn't. He passed out of sight into the back corridor, heading toward the break room and the hidden panel beyond it. The frequency hum overhead deepened again, so subtly that it felt more like a pressure change than a sound. The walls seemed to contract, just barely. The tall man didn't notice. He was still focused on Jack. "What's back there, huh? You hiding something?" Jack's voice didn't change. "He won't like what he finds. You threatening us now? I'm warning you." The tall man shoved Jack back into the counter. Not hard enough to knock him down, but enough to make the gesture feel like a punctuation mark. "A performance? I think you need to start giving us something real, old man. I'm tired of your act." The sound from the back changed. It wasn't a bang, not exactly. More like the sharp report of something metal being hit than a scrambling sound boots slipping, a shelf tipping, something crashing sideways into a wall. Jack didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. The man gripping him froze, eyes darting toward the hallway. Another sound followed, not shouting, not words, just the heavy staccato thump of someone falling hard. And then silence. The hum from the ceiling grew louder in the quiet that followed, filling the space like a pulse. For the first time, Jack saw hesitation not just in posture, but in the eyes. The tall man stepped back, letting go of Jack's collar as if it had suddenly become hot. "What the hell was that?" he asked, but the words were thinner now. Less certain. Jack rolled his shoulders, smoothing out his shirt. He walked past the second beam. "Shouldn't have done that." "What beam? What are you talking about?" Jack stepped back behind the register, slowly, deliberately. "You locked yourselves in with the wrong man." There was a sound from the hallway again, a groan, then nothing. Rafe was still at the front of the store, motionless now. His gun remained in hand, but it wasn't raised anymore. His eyes were fixed on the darkness past the hallway, the part of the store he hadn't explored, the part that now felt like it had teeth. Jack glanced at the timer on the screen beneath. The counter, a quiet red countdown flashed. They're less than 4 minutes now. They'd come in expecting to control time, to dictate what happened and when. But now they were responding, not directing, and they didn't even realize yet how far behind they already were. The sound was sharp, precise, and strangely quiet. A single, suppressed crack echoed from the back hallway, a sound that didn't belong in a gas station. It was fast, clean, and final. Then came a thud, something heavy hitting the floor hard, followed by a metal shelf clattering sideways into the mop bucket. Rafe turned instantly, gun halfway raised but eyes scanning too slowly to catch anything real. The tall man's voice cracked. "What was that? What the hell was that?" Jack didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the hallway. There was no triumph on his face, no gloating, just awareness. That part of the plan had activated on its own now. Marcus had made his decision. The silence after the shot was heavy. No words, no movement. Just that low mechanical hum still pulsing. Through the ceiling vents and the faint drip of water from somewhere near the back sinks, Rafe's eyes darted toward the register. Toward Jack. "Was that you?" he barked. "Did you do that?" Jack didn't respond. He was listening for the follow-up. The second sound, the groan, the scuff of boots, it didn't come. The man who had gone back there hadn't stood back up. "Somebody's back there," Rafe muttered. "There's someone else here." Jack nodded slightly. "I told you." Rafe rounded toward the hallway, trying to stay low, gun-drawn steps. Unsteady now, his weight shifted on every step. Confidence had drained from his walk. The tall one remained at the front, caught between staying with Jack or following Rafe into a space they didn't understand. Then came the voice, calm, quiet, controlled. "Stop right there." It was Marcus. From just inside the hallway, maybe halfway down, close enough to see movement, but far enough to hold his ground. He was behind cover, Jack could hear it in the tone. He was speaking from behind the old water heater cabinet good. "Angle, full visibility, drop your weapon, and back out," Marcus said. "Or I'll take your legs, too." Rafe froze. His back was half to Jack now, gun still up, but no longer aimed. "You shoot again," he said. "And I swear no," Marcus cut in. You don't swear. You're not in charge anymore." There was something in the boy's voice that Jack recognized calm under pressure. They had practiced that tone. The trick wasn't sounding angry or brave. It was sounding like you had nothing left to prove. Jack watched Rafe's shoulders tense, watched the slow coil of rage begin to rise under his panic. The man didn't. Like being shown up, didn't like the sound of a voice that was younger and steadier than his own. He began to step forward. Another shot cracked. This one didn't hit. It struck the floor just inches ahead of Rafe's boot. A burst of tile and grit sprang outward. It was a warning, close enough to sting, close enough to send a message. Rafe stumbled back, nearly losing his footing, hands jerking upward in reflex. His gun clattered to the floor and skittered across the tiles toward the candy rack. The tall one at the counter took 2 steps back, hands now half raised. "I didn't sign up for this," he muttered. He said this would be easy, Jack. Stepped forward slowly and nudged the pistol with the toe of his boot, sliding it further away from Rafe's reach. His voice remained calm even now. "You're done?" Rafe didn't speak. He was still staring down the hallway, trying to catch sight of who was back there, who had fired, who had brought the plan to a halt. Marcus stepped forward slowly from the shadows. The suppressor on the rifle extended from his hands like a quiet declaration. His eyes didn't flicker. His breathing stayed measured. Jack saw it all and didn't interrupt. The kid had taken the shot, made the choice. Not fatal, but decisive. Jack exhaled through his nose, low and slow. They had made a mistake, and now they finally knew it. The tall man never saw it coming. His hands were still halfway raised in some vague display of surrender. When Jack moved, no warning, no flourish, just a tight pivot of the hip and a step forward that closed the distance faster than the eye could track. Jack's left hand gripped the man's wrist, twisting sharply inward while his right elbow struck the forearm in one clean upward motion. He pivoted again, using the man's own momentum to drive him backward, one foot hooking behind his leg, toppling him down to the floor with a dull thud. The register's glow flickered in the periphery, casting fractured light across the scuffed linoleum and the opened snack shelves nearby. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. No wasted movement, no hesitation. The man on the floor groaned, clutching his arm. Jack stood over him, calm, shoulders relaxed, not even breathing hard. It was just what needed to be done. From the hallway, Marcus didn't speak. He watched his godfather through the dim, flickering lights. Watched the way Jack stepped back into position, like he'd never left that world. The transition hadn't been theatrical. It had been subtle, like flipping a switch. One moment he was a cashier with tired eyes and a soft voice. The next, he was something else entirely, something trained. Rafe was still crouched near the candy display, one hand out as if trying to gauge the next move. His eyes were wild now, flicking between Jack and Marcus and the fallen man at his side. His mouth opened once, then closed. Nothing came out. Jack didn't look at him. Not yet. He grabbed a zip tie from beneath the counter. Not a police see-shoe restraint, just something he'd picked up bulk from the hardware supply a year ago. He knelt down beside the disarmed man and bound his wrists with smooth, practiced precision. No struggle, no fuss. The man's breathing was shallow now. The fight drained from him. Behind the glass storefront, the parking lot stretched silent and empty under the buzzing floodlights. The battered van still idled faintly, exhaust curling in the night air. Its windows glowed faintly from the interior dome light. No one was left inside. Everyone had come in. Everyone had stayed. Jack stood again and finally looked at Rafe. Not with anger, just with quiet certainty. "You brought 3 men," Jack said softly. "Now there's 2. Rafe's jaw clenched. "You think this is over?" Jack didn't answer. He picked up the discarded weapon, cleared the chamber with a quick snap, and placed it on the shelf beside him, just out of reach. "Just in view, you thought you were robbing a gas station," he continued. "You didn't check the building, you didn't sweep the exits, you didn't look for alarms, You walked in here thinking we were soft." Rafe shifted slightly, knees tense, eyes twitching toward the door. Jack's tone lowered. Didn't come here to kill anyone," Rafe muttered. "You still might," Jack said, voice even. "Just not the way you thought." There was no music now, no overhead announcements. Just the low hum of the refrigeration unit and the still active frequency vibrating through the vents. Keeping the air dense and unsettled, it wasn't fear filling the room. Any more it was clarity. Rafe finally understood what he'd walked into. That this place hadn't been chosen by chance. That the man behind the counter wasn't caught off guard. Jack glanced toward Marcus, who nodded once and began stepping forward, keeping his distance. Rifle still pointed low, but ready. Shift change, Jack thought to himself. The words were dry. Fitting because the moment Rafe had drawn that gun, the cashier had clocked out, and someone far older, far colder, had taken his place. The fourth man had been waiting in the driver's seat of the battered van, the engine idling low. The dashboard lights flickered on and off, a glitch he hadn't bothered fixing. Outside, the gas station looked calm, almost too calm. The interior? Lights still glowed fluorescent white, and from where he sat, nothing seemed out of place. No alarms, no gunshots heard through the glass, but something didn't feel right. The man shifted forward in his seat, peering through the dirty windshield. He couldn't see the others anymore. They'd gone inside 10 minutes ago. It wasn't supposed to take this long. He tapped the steering wheel with his finger, jaw working. Slowly, then he reached under the seat and pulled out the sawed-off shotgun wrapped in a black rag. He held it for a second, just resting it in his lap, letting the weight of it settle. The wooden grip was scratched and worn, darkened from years of palms and sweat, a weapon of habit. His name was Kip 42. 2 strikes and barely hanging on. The others thought he was just the wheelman, but he knew better. In a job like this, you didn't survive by staying passive. You survived by being the one who finished things when others panicked. He opened the driver's door slowly, stepping out with one boot on the pavement. The shotgun stayed low, resting against his thigh. He scanned the lot. Nothing moved, not even a car on the highway. Just the steady hum of the refrigeration unit and the buzz from the overhead lights. He approached the front door with caution. Every instinct told him something was off. He could feel it in his spine, the way the hairs on his arms had begun to lift, responding to something unseen. As he neared the front window, he saw the reflection of his own face, scruffy, drawn, eyes set deep under a worn ball cap. But what he noticed more was what he didn't see. No one at the counter, no shadows moving, just empty aisles. He gripped the shotgun tighter and stepped closer. Inside, Jack watched him approach. The screen under the counter showed him everything for angles from the exterior cameras, including the one mounted above the gas pump canopy. That one showed the van clearly, showed Kip stepping out. Jack had anticipated it. The van had no license plate. That had been the first signal. The fact that one man remained in the driver's seat while the others spread out inside was the second. In the corner of the stockroom, just beyond where Marcus had taken cover, a small transmitter rested against the old metal supply rack. Jack had installed it years ago, when the neighborhood got rough. Not a security system the corporate office knew about. His own design. It didn't trigger police response. It triggered the outside countermeasures. As Kip neared the doorway, a faint click echoed through the front lot, barely audible. The lights on the canopy above flickered once, then again, then a low hiss. Kip paused. He recognized the sound. Gas, not a lot. Just enough to whisper out from the release valve Jack had manually adjusted 2 years back. A dispersal mechanism built for emergencies. An air-thin cloud of deterrent gas now filtered through the entry. Zona blend designed to irritate the eyes and nose. Not lethal, but enough to slow anyone not wearing protection. His eyes stung. He took a step back, coughing lightly, confused. Then he turned toward the van just in time to see the dashboard lights flicker again, brighter this time. Jack pressed another switch behind the register. The van's engine cut. Out immediately, a remote kill device wired through a relay jack had hidden beneath the vehicle during his cigarette break earlier that evening. It had taken him less than 90 seconds to install. A small precaution in case the getaway started. Too soon, Kip staggered back, now coughing more forcefully. His grip on the shotgun weakened. He dropped to one knee outside the front door, trying to blink through the fog, now clouding his vision. The shotgun slipped from his grasp and clattered to the asphalt dot inside. Marcus lowered his weapon slightly. He's down. Jack didn't move. Let him stay down. Rafe, still crouched behind the candy rack, looked from the hallway to the door and back again. His mouth opened, but no words came. Jack stared at the screen, watching Kip roll too. His side, both hands up, eyes red and watering. The van wasn't going anywhere, and neither were they. The switch Jack had pressed beneath the counter didn't just trigger the gas dispersal or shut down the van. It had one final command built in, one that hummed faintly in the walls before making itself known. The structure, followed by the deep worry sound of motors engaging from the corners of the building. Heavy steel began to descend. Outside, Kip flinched at the noise. He stumbled back to his feet, wiping his sleeve across his face, eyes still, stinging. The front of the gas station, once just a wall of glass and flickering light, began to transform. Steel shutters dropped from concealed panels above the windows and doors, slow but steady, sealing the structure in a dull metallic rhythm. The last shutter to drop was over the main entrance, the same one Kip had nearly approached. It slammed into place with a final, flat boom. He froze. Inside, the temperature seemed to shift. The tension that had been building now took on a different tone contend. Defined, locked into a space that no longer had escape routes. Jack stood behind the counter again. Calm, steady. The register beeped quietly, as if unaware of what was unfolding. The tall man Jack had taken down earlier was now zip-tied at the base of the cooler near the register. Rafe remained crouched, his back against the gum rack, weaponless, sweat collecting at his hairline. Marcus stayed in the hallway, partially hidden behind a metal shelf, rifle angled low but ready. His eyes never left the sightline toward the front. Kip banged a fist against the steel shutter. "Hey, open this. What the hell is going on in there?" Jack didn't respond. Kip was pacing now, shotgun abandoned on the asphalt. His breathing had quickened, more confused than angry. Jack turned to Marcus and spoke quietly. "He won't try to force it. Will he run?" Marcus asked. Jack shook his head. "Not yet. He thinks this is still just a bad robbery. He hasn't realized we were expecting them. The gas station was no longer a store. It was a locked box. One entrance, one exit. The front. Windows were now covered in vertical steel slats, interlocked and reinforced. There were no keys to override it from the outside, and even that required biometric confirmation from inside. Kip tried again. He grabbed a loose trash can and slammed it against the shutter. The impact barely made a dent. The kind of noise that confirmed the barrier wasn't just visual, it was structural. "You're not getting in," Jack said aloud, though no one outside could hear him. Rafe looked up from the floor, voice finally returning. "You did this? You shut us in." Jack didn't look at him. "I secured the building. You chose to walk in." There was a long pause. Rafe's shoulders slumped. His whole frame seemed to deflate. Kip, outside, paced toward the van again. Only now realizing the engine wasn't responsive. He tried the door, tried the ignition. Nothing. He kicked the front tire and stepped back, unsure if he should flee or stay close in case the others found a way out. He was visible now, exposed. Under the lights, no shadows to hide in, no noise to cover him. And with every passing minute, the illusion of control he'd carried as the designated escape driver faded. Inside, he picked one up, turned the dial to a preset channel, and held it to his mouth. Outpost secured. 4 men, 1 outside, contained. 3 inside disabled, cornered, and disarmed. There was a brief, static pause. Then a voice crackled back. "Copy that. 2 units, 5 minutes out. No lights, no sirens." Jack set the radio down, glanced at the monitor one last time, and finally allowed himself to exhale. The lockdown had worked. Now they just had to wait. Kip didn't know the pumps had shut off until he tried to swipe the gas card. The nozzle clicked when he lifted it to light, to dry. No fuel moved through the line. He stared at the screen, blinking through the last traces of tear gas irritation. The display was frozen. No prompt, no numbers. Just a quiet, blinking cursor in the corner. He muttered a curse and looked over his shoulder toward the sealed building. No one visible. The windows were gone, replaced by steel. The door he'd stood in front of moments earlier was now an unbroken wall. The glow of fluorescent lights barely leaked through the seams. He glanced down at the pump, tried again, lifted the nozzle, pressed the grade button. Nothing. The lights on the keypad didn't even flicker. He moved to the next island, jogging now. Second pump, same result. By the time he reached the third, frustration had taken over. He slammed the nozzle back into its cradle with a sharp metallic clank and kicked the base of the unit. The sound echoed across the empty lot. Back inside, Jack monitored him through the exterior feed. The pumps had gone offline the second the lockdown sequence had been triggered. It was part of the same override network, a quiet feature few people knew existed in certain rural stations, especially those upgraded with backup power systems and private infrastructure wiring. Jack had seen to it himself 2 years ago after a string of armed thefts in the county. No fuel meant no flight. And with the van's ignition already disabled by the relay switch Jack had installed earlier, Kip's last real option was foot travel, but even that would be slow. The next structure wasn't for nearly 3 miles down the dark stretch of Highway 14. No sidewalk, no cover, just open asphalt and broken shoulder grass. Kip pulled out his phone. The screen lit up, but there was no signal. He tried refreshing the screen, then held it high, walking toward the edge of the lot. Still nothing. No bars, no service. The jammer was working. Jack had activated that first, long before the confrontation had begun. Hidden under the low roof on the far side of the station, the device blocked signals within a 2-mile radius. It had cost Jack nearly half a paycheck to acquire and install, but it had paid for itself many times over in quiet deterrence. No one could call out. No one could warn others. Inside, the tension was still thick. Rafe hadn't moved. Marcus kept his aim low, but steady. The younger man's breathing had slowed now, measured. He glanced toward the feed, saw Kip pacing. Between the pumps, his movements increasingly erratic. "He's trapped," Marcus said. Jack gave a short nod. "He just doesn't know how trapped." Kip returned to the van and opened the driver's door again, sat behind the wheel and slammed his hands against it. He stared out through the cracked windshield, trying to calculate some distance, maybe just nerve. He considered running. He considered waiting. He considered going back to the shuttered door with his hands up. But none of those options felt like survival. The lights above the pumps remained steady. No flicker, no surge, but they were hollow now. Behind them but sealed lines and locked systems. Every pump nozzle was dry, every button dead. Even the card reader had shut down entirely. He picked up the shotgun from the asphalt, thought about loading it again, then set it across his lap instead. Not a weapon anymore, just a relic. The threat was gone. What remained was frustration, confusion, the sense that someone had outplanned them. Long before they'd arrived, Kip glanced to the road. No headlights yet, but he knew they'd come, and when they did, they'd be silent. No sirens, no warnings. His window was gone, and the van wouldn't get him a foot farther. The silence inside the gas station had changed. It wasn't the taut, coiled kind from minutes earlier, the kind that fills the air just before something explodes. Now it was heavier, slower, a silence where people measured their breathing and glanced sideways instead of forward. The kind that settles once you realize the worst has already started and hasn't finished. Rafe was the only one still upright, though barely. His back rested against the base of a display stand, legs sprawled, out, hands empty. Sweat had soaked through the collar of his flannel shirt. His eyes darted from Jack to Marcus. But mostly, he avoided looking at the man, still groaning quietly on the floor his partner. Shot clean through the thigh with a non-lethal round, still bleeding into the vinyl tile. The third man, older, broad, and now zip-tied, with his arms locked behind him, had been wedged against the cooler. His face was swollen from where Jack had disarmed him earlier. He hadn't said a word since. Jack didn't sit. He stood behind the counter for a long moment, watching. Then he stepped out slowly and walked across the room, not with urgency, but with purpose, like someone returning to something they'd done 1,000 times before. He stopped in front of Rafe. He didn't shout, didn't raise his voice, just stood over him and asked one question. Rafe swallowed, blinked fast. I don't. Jack tilted his head, cutting him off. "I'm not asking about money. You didn't come for the drawer. You didn't even look for the cameras. You walked in quiet, mapped the floor, let the kid move around, and stalled like you were waiting for something. This wasn't a grab and run, so why here?" He let the question hang. Rafe looked toward the front shutter, then toward the bleeding man on the ground. He opened his mouth, but Jack didn't wait. He crouched slowly, knees stiff, one hand on the floor to brace himself. The movement alone shifted the room's energy. "I'm going to ask you once," Jack said, voice calm, "and if I don't like what I hear, I'll assume the reason has nothing to do with chance." Rafe hesitated, then finally said, "We were told the station was soft, just one old guy and a cash drawer." Jack didn't move. Rafe continued, quickly now. "Man who knows a guy said the owner barely watches the cameras, said the back was full of cartons, and you wouldn't resist, said Thursday nights were low volume." "Quiet? Who told you that?" Jack asked. "I don't know. Just a guy. All right? We heard it from someone who's done this before. Said it'd be easy, said you'd comply." Jack leaned forward slightly. "What did they tell you about the safe?" Rafe shifted. "That there wasn't one. That you just kept change under the counter, and you still came with 4 men." Rafe's eyes flickered. We figured, better to be sure." Jack nodded once, then stood up slowly. The movement made Rafe flinch. Marcus stepped in from the hallway, eyes narrowed. He looked to Jack for a cue, but Jack didn't give one. Instead, Jack walked over to the cooler and grabbed a bottle of water. He opened it and tossed it to the zip-tied man by the fridge. The man caught it awkwardly, spilling some down his shirt as he drank. Then Jack turned back to Rafe. "You weren't after the drawer," Jack said. "You were here for something else, something you thought was stored here." Rafe's lips parted, like he wanted to lie again, but the words never came. Jack crouched once more and leaned in, eyes steady. "There's no gold here. No drugs, no guns. Just one cashier with a long memory and a kid who's been trained better than most police. So if someone told you this place was a target someone with detail, you'd better start thinking about who set you up." Rafe blinked. Rapidly, "We weren't set up. We just got bad info." Jack nodded slowly, but his face said he didn't believe that. Not fully. He stood again. His knees popped this time, louder, and then he said it quieter than before. "Tell me the name." Rafe didn't speak, but the way his eyes widened was answer enough. Rafe's breathing had slowed, but his shoulders stayed hunched like he was still bracing for the next hit. Jack didn't say anything else after his last question. He just watched, waited, and let the silence do the work. Marcus stood nearby, rifle lowered but not slung. The wounded man on the floor moaned again softer now, like even his pain had started to fade beneath the weight of everything else. Outside, the 4th man had disappeared behind the van, crouching low and trying to make sense of a night that had unraveled minute by minute, but the real unraveling had started long before they pulled into the lot. Jack moved back toward the counter, slow and steady. He didn't limp, but the tightness in his right leg gave him away. 22 years in the Special Forces left gifts, like that ones you could stretch but never erase. His right knee had taken shrapnel outside Kandahar in '03, and the VA had done a passable job of keeping it functional. But in moments like these, when adrenaline gave way to aftershock, the stiffness came roaring back. He reached beneath the counter and slid open a narrow drawer that most people assumed held receipts or cleaning logs. What it actually held were printouts, thermal sheets dated that morning, as they were every morning. Bolo alerts, vehicle plates, notable movements across 3 counties. Jack reviewed them with care, every shift out of habit more than fear. That's why the name Rafe had stuck. Not because it was unusual, but because it was flagged. According to the sheet, Rafe Carson had been seen at a pawn shop outside of Clovis 2 days prior, selling a ring traced back to a home invasion that hadn't made the news yet. The report noted associations with a loose network of itinerant criminals operating out of the Central Valley. Mostly in low-profile burglaries, some in more violent takeovers, no fixed territory, no lasting alliances, just opportunity. And that's what they thought this was. Jack placed the sheet on the counter where Rafe could see it. "You think I printed that out because I like wasting paper?" Rafe didn't respond, Jack tapped the paper. "You were already on a list before you walked through my door. You were already in the wrong place. You just didn't know how wrong." Rafe finally spoke, his voice rasping. "They told us this was a soft spot, old man. No cameras, quiet location, no patrols past midnight." Jack nodded, still standing. "They were right about one thing. It's quiet." Marcus smirked faintly from the corner. Rafe looked up again, and there was something different in his eyes now. Not panic, not even regret, just the slow realization that he'd been sold a version of reality that had never existed. "What is this place?" he asked quietly. Jack didn't answer right away. He looked toward the back hallway, where Marcus's rifle still hovered steady. Then toward the shuttered windows, the cameras, the reinforced locks, the reinforced ceiling panels, the layers most people never saw. Most people didn't need to. "It's a gas station," Jack said finally, "but I've been robbed twice. Once in '09, again in '14. Both times the cops showed up late. Both times I got left to clean up the mess." He let the sentence sit there for a moment. "So I made some changes." Rafe blinked again, slower this time. "They didn't tell us about that." "No," Jack said. "They wouldn't have. There was no glory in it. No smugness, just truth." Jack had seen enough in his life to know that people underestimate the places that seem small. They overlook quiet men. They forget that experience isn't loud. Rafe leaned his head back against the display and closed his eyes for a moment. Jack glanced toward the door. The shutter hadn't moved, but he knew what time it was. Help would be arriving soon. Silent help, the kind he trusted. And when they came, they'd find everything recorded, cataloged, already labeled. The camera system had backups. The safe hidden beneath the mop sink had been untouched. And Jack, the old man behind the register, would hand over 3 subdued criminals and a van that wouldn't even start without his override. They thought they were walking into a soft hit, an easy job, a place where they'd take cash, maybe intimidate a clerk and disappear before anyone noticed. But they picked the wrong building and the wrong man. The light in the back office was dull, coming from a single overhead bulb that flickered every now and then. The room smelled faintly of old paper and electrical heat, like most rooms that hadn't seen daylight in years. Jack stepped inside and closed the door behind him. For the first time that night, he let out a breath that wasn't measured or disguised. It came low from his chest, carrying with it a weight he rarely allowed himself to feel. He crossed the room 2, the filing cabinet, not the one with spare inventory logs and payroll forms, but the false one. A thin layer of dust covered the top drawer, untouched for months by design. Jack knelt down and reached behind the bottom corner, fingers finding the concealed switch nestled beneath the lip of the unit. A quiet click sounded, barely audible over the hum of the cooling fan in the corner. The back panel slid open. Inside, tucked beneath 2 stacks of blackened folders, sat a small gray case no larger than a paperback. Jack lifted it gently, as if it might still be warm, and placed it on the desk. He didn't need a password. The device recognized his fingerprint, then prompted for a key phrase spoken in a precise cadence. He said the word slowly. 10 clicks. West of Firelight. The drive's LED blinked green dot. The screen lit up. Rows of directories appeared dated, coded, some so old they predated digital documentation standards. These weren't mission files. From basic tours, these were from Joint Task Force Phoenix, from Sandglass Operations, from the years where everything blurred into maps, photographs, and coded dispatches sent under midnight ciphers. Jack scrolled slowly, his hand hovering just above the trackpad as he navigated through the cascade of folders. Most of the names were long since inactive. Some flagged with red Kiermia, others flagged yellow under watch, relocated, compromised. Then he saw one. It didn't stand out at first. No highlight, no tag. Just a name tucked inside a folder labeled Cross River Communications. Disavowed. He clicked it. A profile opened, grainy photo, partial fingerprints, basic biometric data. The man's face was younger, fuller, but recognizable. It was Rafe Carson. Jack leaned closer, eyes narrowing. The file wasn't current. It dated back to 2013. Afghanistan, a side-channel operation involving a local fixer, suspected of running interference for foreign interests. The note was brief. Source recruited by field officer under duress. Record uncertain. Monitor for irregular reinsertion. Jack scrolled further. There were 4 incident reports, none of them conclusive. All of them hinted at failed coordination, blurred loyalties, and ghosted team members. But one phrase appeared more than once: possible double exposure. Back in the old office chair, the leather creaking beneath him, he stared at the screen as the fan on the drive whirred louder. Rafe had been on someone's radar before, not as a target but as an asset. A burned one, maybe. Recycled, possibly. Or left behind and angry enough to turn on the very channels that once protected him. And now he'd shown up here, in a dusty gas station off Highway 14, supposedly, by coincidence, supposedly chasing money. Jack knew better. He copied the file to a secure folder, encrypted it again, and powered down the drive. He returned it to its compartment, slid the panel shut, and stood up slowly. There were too many gaps in that file, too many convenient omissions, and one glaring detail Rafe hadn't. Looked surprised when Jack moved the way he did. He hadn't frozen like the others. He had flinched, yes, but not blindly, like a man who'd once worn the same boots, or something close. Jack turned off the light and stepped out of the office, closing the door behind him. Outside, the night still looked quiet, but something had changed. The men who came here weren't just criminals. They were part of a thread that stretched back years, maybe decades, and Jack wasn't done pulling it. Jack leaned against the edge of the counter, eyes scanning the room as if he were still searching for something that hadn't yet revealed itself. The others were quiet. Marcus remained by the rear hallway, alert but composed. The zip-tied outlaw had gone limp, his head resting against the cooler glass, breathing shallow, but even Rafe hadn't said another word since the file came up. He didn't have to. Jack's silence said everything. The name was still turning in Jack's mind. Kane. It wasn't a name you forgot. The first time he'd heard it, the man had gone by a different one, Deacon, or at least that's what the unit called him before. They found out who he really was. The records from that operation were buried deep, classified and sealed under multiple agencies, some of which no longer officially existed, but Jack remembered it vividly. In 2006, during a joint interdiction sweep near the Pakistan border, Jack had been part of a team tasked with intercepting a rogue logistics chain, funneling stolen U.S. arms back into insurgent hands. The mission was meant to be surgical extract and disappear, but it wasn't. They found more than weapons. They found coordination, infrastructure, and a man who didn't fit the usual profile. He wasn't tribal, wasn't religious, and he didn't speak like a foot soldier. He spoke like someone educated in systems, someone who understood the cracks between agencies and how to live inside them. They eventually identified him as Kane Mercer, formerly of a now-defunct private military company. Records indicated dishonorable discharge, war profiteering charges that never stuck, and 3 years unaccounted for before he resurfaced overseas in a freelance capacity. Kane had been captured during that operation briefly, but he didn't stay in custody long. A trade deal involving multiple parties saw him disappear again, this time off-grid. And now, years later, Jack had reason to believe Kane was back. Not as a soldier, not as a mercenary, but as something else entirely. Coordinator? A handler. A name that kept popping up around loosely connected crimes. Warehouse hits, silent takeovers, and low-profile operations that didn't make national news because they were too well-timed to feel random. The men tonight. They weren't military, but they were controlled, directed. Their patterns felt like muscle memory, not entirely their own. Jack moved to the side of the register and unlocked a drawer that most people assumed held spare receipt rolls. Instead, it contained a slim, padded folder sealed in a zip pouch. Inside was a sheet marked with 6 names and a small map with arrows indicating recent activity across the region. The name Kane had been penciled in the corner months ago, back when Jack had first started noticing the patterns, but now, with Rafe's presence and the file from the drive, the connection was too strong to ignore. He opened the drawer again and retrieved a burner phone device without a camera, without GPS, without any markings at all. He scrolled to a number already saved. No name, just a code. He pressed call. The line rang once, then clicked. "I might have a thread," Jack said quietly. "He's closer than we thought." No reply came, just silence. He continued. The station got hit tonight. 4 men. One of them has a background we flagged years ago. But that's not what concerns me. What concerns me is the way they moved. This wasn't a smash and grab. He waited again. Then, finally, a voice answered, deep, steady, and cautious. Did he say a name? Jack's eyes settled on Rafe. Still, slouched under the flickering light, Kane. There was a long pause. Then, just one word. Understood. The line went dead. Jack slipped the phone back into the drawer and exhaled slowly. The game had shifted. Kane wasn't hiding anymore. He was sending men into quiet corners, testing responses, looking for weak points. What he didn't know was that Jack wasn't just a cashier, and this gas station wasn't just a store. It was a trap Kane had now walked into through others, yes, but close enough to reach, and Jack was done waiting. The wind had picked up outside. Dust swirled near the pumps, catching under the edge of the awning and rattling loose bits of signage with a metallic clatter. Jack stood just inside the glass, watching the van sit idly in the lot. The 4th man inside hadn't moved in minutes. Maybe he was trying to decide if running would change anything. Maybe he already knew it wouldn't. Jack didn't care. His focus had shifted. It hadn't been a robbery, not really. It looked like one. It was dressed like one. But something about the timing, the execution, the restraint all pointed to something else. It was a probe, a simulation. Kane wasn't after cash. He was after confirmation. Jack walked back to the office and reopened the hard drive. This time, he went deeper into the subdirectories that only he could access, where incident summaries sat layered beneath surveillance logs and off-the-record communication summaries. There was a pattern there, and Jack had been tracking it for months. Small attacks, isolated locations, always targeting people with military or intelligence backgrounds, now living off-grid or in low-profile civilian roles. Some were quietly killed, others simply vanished. Jack hadn't seen the thread until 3 weeks ago, when a Marine turned rancher disappeared near Prescott without a trace. He remembered the man, served with 2nd Recon, retired quietly after his 3rd tour, disappeared. Into a cattle farm, never posted online, never talked. Jack had flagged it as unusual, but without evidence, it had gone cold. Now, it didn't feel cold. It felt rehearsed. Tonight's crew wasn't sloppy. They were careful. Too careful. No fingerprints, no names except for one slip Rafe's. And that name, Jack now suspected, had been meant to trigger something, like someone pressing lightly along the edge of a buried wire, just to see where it frayed. He pulled up the feed from the backup camera systems separate from the front-facing unit that had glitched earlier. This one was internal, shielded, and self-powered. It had caught everything the others didn't. The moment the lights flickered, the precise second Rafe looked toward the rear hallway. The van positioning itself between the pump and the exit to smooth to many practiced movements. They hadn't been here to take over the station. They were here to take the temperature. Of Jack, of his readiness, of whether he still had the reflexes that had made him dangerous once. Kane had sent a message, one with layered meaning. It wasn't just about seeing if Jack still had it, it was about forcing him into motion. Out of the shadows, Jack sat down slowly, his hand curling around the edge of the desk as if steadying himself from a memory that had just hit hard. Kane didn't care about money. He cared about removing obstacles, and Jack had been an obstacle once, maybe one that had gone quiet too long. The probe was a warning. If Jack responded, Kane would know he was still alive and still capable. If he didn't, Kane would mark him as weak, vulnerable, and likely next. But Jack had responded deliberately, efficiently, and Kane was watching. He leaned back in the chair, eyes tracing the bulletin board near the far wall, where newspaper clippings, printed reports, and maps lined up like fragments of a larger plan. There were red pins in 5 towns. 3 of those locations had already seen strange break-ins or violent incidents, always explained away as local crime. But they weren't. Each one had a name behind it. Each one had someone like Jack. People trained not just to fight, but to vanish. When necessary, retired, quiet, watching. And now they were being rooted out. The gas station was never the target. Jack was, and by fighting back, he'd confirmed something Kane had only suspected. That he was still dangerous, still connected, still willing to act. And Kane had just learned that he wasn't the only one who knew how to set a trap. The office lights stayed off this time. Jack didn't need them. He knew the room well enough by feel. The small safe beneath the desk was already open. Left that way during the earlier scramble, but he reached past it toward the wall panel behind. A slight push, and the false wall slid inward just 2 inches. Enough. He slipped a hand inside and pulled out a narrow, dust-covered radio box cold to the touch and heavy. Not military issue, civilian shell. Modified, purpose-built. He hadn't used it in 9 years. There were still burn marks along the battery hatch from the last time. It had overheated mid-transmission during a field blackout in Romania. But it worked. It always had. Then, to coded pulses that meant nothing to anyone outside a very particular circle, it wasn't encrypted in the modern sense. It was buried in timing, tone, and phrasing, a structure only understood by those who'd once passed through the same hell. The frequency he landed on was quiet, but not dead. Jack waited, let it breathe. Then he keyed the mic, 2 words, "Still breathing." Didn't say them with anger, but then a faint click replied, "Nothing else." A confirmation. Jack leaned back and tapped out a second phrase, using the Morse switch built into the side of the unit. Still watching. 3 seconds later, the same click. He didn't expect anything more. This wasn't a conversation. It was a signal. It had only ever been used for one kind of communication in Isabel. Short-range bursts sent through relay points, still operating in silence across rural networks. These were protocols created after 2009, when several joint intelligence operatives were burned by an internal leak that had never made the papers. A counter-system had been built in the fallout. Jack had helped draft it. Only 6 people had the means to receive those codes. Maybe 4 were still alive. But Kane had once been in their orbit. He would know the structure. He would recognize the language. This wasn't a bluff. It was a reminder. Jack packed the transmitter back into its case and slid it into the hidden compartment. He sealed the wall again, checked the latch, and pulled the carpet slightly forward to hide the scuff dot in the distance. On the van was gone. That man would talk when the time came. Fear had a way of burning hotter when it came late. Behind the counter, Jack reset the camera system and checked the secondary feed. It had recorded everything. He spooled the relevant portion, encrypted it, and uploaded it to a secure offsite node. Not the police. The desert smelled dry, even beneath the scent of gasoline and dust. He lit a cigarette, something he rarely did anymore. He looked up at the moon, half obscured by thin clouds, then down again toward the dark stretch of highway. Somewhere, Kane would be sitting in a room not unlike this one. Maybe not tonight, but soon. And someone would place a small slip of paper on his desk, or pass him a note across a bar, still breathing, still watching, and Kane would know what that meant. He hadn't buried Jack Miller deep enough, and now Jack was digging back. 3 days after the incident, a call came in to the county sheriff's office from a rancher near Dry Creek Road, about 11 miles east of the gas station. He'd spotted a van parked at the edge of his grazing land, angled oddly against a barbed wire fence with the front tires partly buried in dust. No one around, no signs of movement. Just sitting there, door cracked, keys gone. Deputies arrived an hour later. They dusted the interior, exterior, steering column, and door handles. Not a single viable print. No blood, no receipts, nothing personal. The VIN had been scrubbed, plates gone. The ignition had been hot-wired, and the carpet ripped up in the front passenger footwell, likely to remove any trace materials inside the back. There were fast food wrappers from a chain that hadn't operated in the region for 6 months. Jack would later say that wasn't an accident. Kane knew how to create time fog clues designed to confuse the timeline of events. No GPS system, no cell phones, just a burned matchbook from a Nevada truck stop wedged in the crevice between the seats. Either it was meant to mislead, or it was meant to provoke. The sheriff himself called Jack that night, mostly out of courtesy. He didn't ask questions about what had really happened at the station. Jack's security tapes had been edited clean, lawful, just enough to show a botched robbery, with the suspects retreating when things escalated. No shots, no lockdown, no panic button, no names, nothing to make the official record messier than it needed to be. "Van's clean," the sheriff said. "If the driver had a past, It didn't leave a trail. Jack thanked him, told him he appreciated the follow-up, told him to let him know if anything else turned up. Then he hung up the phone, walked back to the storeroom, and stood there in the quiet for a moment. He looked at the godson, Marcus, who was stacking cases of bottled water without a word. Marcus glanced over, then went back to work. They didn't need to talk about it. The recovery of the van confirmed what Jack had already suspected. The fourth Manda, one who waited outside, had no intention of fighting once the plan fell apart. He wasn't a soldier. He was a monitor, a relay. His job had been to observe, report, and disappear. And that's exactly what he had done. But Jack wasn't concerned about the driver's disappearance. He was concerned about the silence that followed. No chatter, no new bolos, no whispers on the veteran channels. Just quiet. That was the part that confirmed it. This wasn't over. The abandoned van hadn't been discarded. It had been placed. Strategically, intentionally. Jack reviewed the sheriff's photos again on a tablet in the office. The position of the van was odd. Too visible for someone running. Too hidden for someone abandoning it in panic. The ground around it had been disturbed in a wide arc, like someone had scouted multiple parking angles before settling on that one. And behind the van further up the ridge was a camera nailed to a tree. The deputy hadn't noticed it, but Jack had zoomed in. He saw the glint. He knew the model. A passive trail camera designed for hunters, motion-triggered infrared, battery life of weeks. It wasn't placed by a hunter. It had been placed by someone who wanted to know who found the van and how fast. Jack scribbled a note on a legal pad and slid it under the drawer. One sentence: if they're watching the van, they're watching the man. Then he turned off the lights, locked the front door, and went back to his chair by the monitor. The screen cycled through the outside feed. Nothing unusual. A few cars, a wandering coyote, then stillness. He leaned forward, elbow on the desk, and whispered more to himself than to anyone else. They're still out there. And the quiet wasn't peace. It was preparation. The sky was still dark when Jack stepped out the side entrance, boots crunching on gravel as he lit the floodlight above the service area. The beam washed over the concrete, catching faint traces of the night before scuffed rubber from a boot. Dragged across the floor, a small dark smear near the end of the snack aisle where one of the outlaws had fallen. The air was still cool, touched with the faint sharpness that always came just before sunrise. To most, it would feel like just another Thursday morning. But Jack wasn't most people. He walked back in, sleeves rolled, eyes steady. There was a rhythm to what he did next, like he'd done it before. Not here, not in this exact place, but in other places, other nights. Cleanup wasn't just about removing evidence. It was about resetting the space, reclaiming control that mattered. The first thing was the camera footage. The original feeds had already been backed up to an encrypted node off-site during the incident. So Jack calmly deleted the local files. Then he created a secondary version. It is filtered and time-stamped to show a basic robbery attempt that ended in retreat. No sound, no weapons visible, just a few blurred faces, a scuffle, and then the doors swinging open. When the sheriff or anyone else asked, that would be enough. It would pass scrutiny without inviting further involvement. After that, he got on his knees and scrubbed the floor by hand. Not just the blood minimal as it had been, but the drag marks and scuffs. One of the tiles had chipped when the first outlaw hit the ground. Jack replaced it from a stash in the back. He used to keep them for repairs after the occasional rowdy traveler or drunk. Now, it served a different purpose. The bullet hole, in the far corner left by Marcus' warning shot, was shallow, having embedded in the drywall just above the mop bucket. Jack removed the round with pliers, then patched the hole with compound and a fresh coat of beige paint. He worked in silence, just the hum of the refrigerator units and the occasional drip of the coffee machine keeping him company. By 5:15 a.m., the interior looked untouched. Shelves restocked, counter wiped, trash removed. The security shutters had been lifted. From the outside, the place looked unchanged, like nothing had happened. That was important, not because he wanted to hide, but because the right kind of silence was louder than noise. Marcus arrived an hour later, wearing the same blank expression he'd had since the incident. He didn't speak at first, just nodded, and took his place behind the register while Jack finished logging the inventory. Count the boy's hands didn't shake. Jack noticed that they spoke briefly, just enough to agree on the narrative. No elaborate lies, just gaps, confusion, an attempted robbery, a bit of panic, nothing else. The less said, the fewer threads to pull. Jack told Marcus to take the weekend off. The boy didn't argue. He knew that meant more than rest. It meant stay put. At exactly 6 a.m., the bell above the front door chimed. The first customer of the day, a trucker with a thermos and tired eyes, walked in, nodded a silent greeting, and grabbed a donut from the warmer. Jack rang him up like usual, even asked about road conditions up north. Nothing in his voice suggested anything out of place, and when the man left, Jack turned back to the register, made a small note on the logbook, and reset the drawer. It was as if the night had never happened. But Jack knew better. He looked once more at the wall monitor. The new camera overlay showed a slightly wider angle now. He'd adjusted it during the cleanup. Better view of the side exit, longer coverage of the register area, just in case someone else came through that door thinking they were walking into a routine shift by sunrise. The coffee was fresh, the floors were clean, and the silence was back. But Jack Miller wasn't fooled. He wasn't just running a gas station anymore, he was preparing. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up just past 9, gravel crunching beneath the tires as it angled into the front lot beside the diesel pump. Jack didn't look up right away. He saw the reflection in the window-brown hat, mirrored sunglasses. A slow, deliberate step as the door creaked open and shut with that familiar weighted sound. Sheriff Delgado didn't rush. He never had. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and slid the coffee pot back into place behind the counter. No one else was. In the store, the rush of early commuters had passed, and the truckers hadn't started cycling through again. A perfect window. The bell above the door rang with its usual hollow clang. Delgado stepped in, removing his glasses slowly as his eyes adjusted to the flicker of fluorescent light. "Morning," Jack said, not smiling, but not unfriendly either. "Morning," Delgado replied, stepping up to the counter but not resting on it. He always stood a little back, as if he never wanted to make anyone feel cornered. Even when he was the law in the room, Jack filled a paper cup with black coffee and slid it across without being asked. Delgado took it, nodded, and sipped. For a while, they stood like that, just two men over a counter, the only sound coming from the low hum of the refrigeration unit near the dairy section. Outside, a breeze lifted dust across the road, but didn't break the silence inside, heard from the deputy. Delgado said finally, "They found the van. Nothing useful. No fingerprints, no prints around the area. Camera trap on a tree nearby. Nothing hooked to it anymore, but the bark was scraped. Whoever placed it came back." Jack nodded. Smart enough not to leave trash. Or smart enough to clean up. "After testing the waters," Delgado replied, watching him carefully. Jack didn't answer. He pulled a receipt from the register and scribbled something on the back. A fuel total, an excuse to keep his hands busy. Delgado took another sip of coffee. "You edited the tapes." Jack looked up just once, then back down at the paper. "I gave you what you needed. You always do." More silence. Delgado's tone didn't accuse, but it didn't excuse either. He'd been in the county long enough to remember when Jack first showed up. Years back, after retiring without much ceremony, he'd taken the job at the station within a week. Quiet, reliable, never caused trouble, but never volunteered much either. "You know," Delgado said, placing the coffee on the counter carefully, "I get a dozen reports a year about kids trying to boost snacks or some strung-out guy swinging at the clerk. We clean it up, we move on. But that night, no panic calls, no 911 alerts, but the station locks down tight like a vault. The power flickers. A van disappears. I come in, and the place smells like fresh paint." Jack folded the receipt and set it on the counter. "We're lucky no one got hurt." Delgado raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" Jack met his gaze now, direct. "I'm sure enough." Delgado studied him for a beat longer, then he nodded slow, accepting the limits of the conversation. He didn't need every detail. He just needed to know things were contained. And with Jack, they usually were. "I respect what you're doing here," Delgado said, picking up the coffee again. "But if this comes around again and it lands messier next time, I'll handle it," Jack said, voice even. Delgado looked at him, then nodded again, more solemn this time. "I believe you." He turned to leave, his boots clicking on the tile. Just before he pushed the door open, he paused. "Back when you served," he said without turning, "you ever hear the name Kane?" Jack didn't answer immediately. Once he replied, Delgado gave a single nod. "Thought so." Then he stepped outside into the morning glare, and the door swung shut behind him with a final clang. Jack stood still, staring at the place where the sheriff had stood, the silence hanging. Again, but heavier now. Some questions were asked without asking, and some answers didn't need to be spoken at all. The door was locked early that evening, the closed for maintenance sign taped to the glass, though the inside lights remained on. No customers, no traffic, just Jack and Marcus standing behind the counter, the monitor feeds glowing faintly. Beside them, Jack unrolled a laminated sheet and slid it across the surface. It was hand-drawn, not printed lines, arrows, coded labels. Every angle of the store was mapped, including the blind spots Jack had spent years eliminating. He tapped the far corner near the utility closet. If someone breaks the line of sight, Marcus studied it without speaking, jaw tight with concentration. He didn't ask questions, just nodded, already memorizing the pathways. Jack had seen that look before in younger men overseas who weren't soldiers yet, but would be. They moved to the storeroom next. Jack flicked on the emergency battery switch, and a soft red light glowed from a corner panel. Inside the steel box were toggles labeled by hand. Shutters override OCAMs. "Silent. You never touch these unless you're sure," Jack said. "Not unless it's real." "Got it?" Marcus nodded again. "Got it?" Jack handed him a dummy trigger to practice with nothing connected, just muscle memory. Marcus took it, held it steady, then reset the latch. Jack watched his form, noting the grip, the composure. The boy was learning fast. They walked through the back exit protocols next. The door had 2 deadbolts, but also a manual catch plate Jack had installed himself. He explained how the latch worked, if the electronic lock failed, how to jam it, how to unjam it. Marcus repeated it back, step by step. Jack didn't speak often during the instruction. He didn't need to. Marcus was past the point of needing reassurance. Now he needed precision. They went over the new inventory system next, not the one connected to the registers, but the shadow ledger Jack had always kept in a locked drawer. It wasn't about tracking candy bars or cigarettes. It was about noting irregular purchases. Items left behind, small things out of place. Jack had started keeping the log after an incident 5 years ago. A stranger who asked too many questions, left without buying anything, then showed up again 2 nights later, wearing different clothes and a different accent. That stranger had never come back a 3rd time. Jack never said why. By the time they reached the final stage of training, the emergency fallback, the sun had dipped below the hills. They stood in the utility hallway, the faint hum of the cooler unit echoing around them. Jack pulled open a low cabinet and revealed a small duffel bag, plain canvas, with a weatherproof seal. Inside, a burner phone, prepaid, a pocket radio, a second key to the cash drawer, flashlight, medical wrap, 2 laminated sheets with radio frequencies and code words. "This isn't for calling help," Jack said. "It's for calling me if I'm not here, if something happens." Marcus swallowed hard, then nodded. "Okay." Jack closed the bag, replaced it, and locked the cabinet. Then he stood quietly, hand resting on the latch. "Why me?" Marcus asked after a moment. "Why teach me this? Why now?" Jack didn't answer right away. He looked at the boy no longer just a part-time hire with good manners and a mop. Not just the godson of an old friend. Something had changed after that night, and Jack knew Kane had seen it too. "Because I trust you," Jack finally said. "And because someone has to be ready." Marcus didn't nod this time. He just stood still, letting the weight of the answer settle. They walked back toward the front. The store silent, except for the soft hum of the freezer unit. Jack flicked off the auxiliary lights and reset the lock. Tomorrow, the sign would flip back to open. But tonight, they trained. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the dry grass and broken fence posts that bordered Jack's modest backyard. The evening air carried the faint scent of dust and mesquite, still warm from the day, but beginning too cool with the promise of night. Jack sat in the old wooden chair that had leaned in that same spot for years. It creaked beneath him, worn smooth by time and the weight of habit. In his lap was the folder-thick manila. The spine, faded black ink, marked it. Kane, Priority 1. The folder hadn't been touched in nearly a decade, not since Jack filed it away after the last confirmed sighting overseas. At the time, Kane had disappeared into a network of private contracts, shell identities, and offshore accounts. No one pursued it further. No agency wanted the mess. But Jack had kept the file, not out of duty, out of instinct. Now it sat open again. Pages spread in his lap. Surveillance stills. From 20 years ago, a blurred photograph of Kane exiting a vehicle in Kandahar, eyes hidden behind mirrored glasses. A transcript of an intercepted conversation, partial and redacted. A map with pins. Red thread ran between a few of them, notes scribbled in the margins in Jack's own tight, no-nonsense hand. He reached for a pen, drew a circle around a town name that had only become relevant, recently one that now mattered more than it should have. He underlined it twice. The back door creaked open. Behind him, Marcus stepped out slowly, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He said nothing, just handed one over and took the seat beside him. For a while they sat in silence, watching the horizon shift from burnt orange to purple. "Is that him?" Marcus asked quietly, nodding toward the folder. Jack didn't answer. Immediately, he turned a page instead. There was a copy of a medical report injury sustained by Kane during an operation in '03, shrapnel near the ribs. Jack remembered the field medic who had treated him. Kane should have died. He didn't. "I'm sure of it now," Jack said. Marcus looked down at his own hands, still calloused from stocking shelves and training drills. "So what happens next?" Jack didn't move. "That depends on him." A gust of wind stirred the loose papers, and Jack placed a calloused hand over the folder to keep them from scattering. The edge of one photo slipped into view grainy. Recent surveillance from the last few weeks pulled from a data archive Jack had access to through old channels. Kane wasn't hiding anymore. He was recruiting, testing, sending messages through pawns who didn't even know who they worked for. The gas station had never been about money. It had been a pressure test, and Jack had passed, but that only meant the real test hadn't started yet. A rumble sounded far off in the sky, low and deep. Thunder, faint but unmistakable. Marcus looked up. The sky was clear in the west, but clouds had begun forming behind them, dense, gray, and silent for now. "Storm coming," he said. Jack nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Always is." He leaned forward and removed a small black notebook. From the back pocket of the folder, inside were names. Most were crossed out, others were circled. He flipped to the last page. A blank space remained. He wrote something down. Marcus didn't ask what. The wind picked up again, sharper now, carrying the cool bite of shifting pressure. Jack reached down, slid the folder back into its weatherproof sleeve, and tucked it into the canvas bag near his feet. He stood slowly, his knees stiffed from hours at the station, and looked out across the landscape fences, open land, and beyond that, the road. Quiet for now, but Jack knew that silence never lasted, not in this line of life. And not with men like Kane still breathing. The war hadn't ended. It had just found a new zip code.